Hello and welcome into another edition of Huber and Friends. I'm Jeremy Huber, and we're lucky enough to be joined by another great guest. It's MLB Network Radio's Mike Ferrin, of course, also of college baseball fame, broadcaster extraordinaire. Mike, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Huber and Friends.
I mean, Jeremy, you and I have known each other for long enough that you don't need to lie to everybody about broadcaster extraordinaire. I mean, come on. You don't have to try and butter me up. Come on, we're old friends. No, I'm thrilled to be on with you. You know how much I love you, so this is great.
Let's start here. You kind of mentioned it. How did we meet?
So we met working as update anchors at SiriusXM. I've been there 17 years now, so it was probably about 17 years ago, right? Like
I got there in 7.
Yeah, so I got there in July of 7. I had a lot less gray in my beard at that point, so
that's why I shave.
You look exactly the same. And I think we struck up a friendship because I always really appreciated working with you because you're such a professional, and so I admired that about you, and I like being around people who are pros, and so I think that's probably why I was drawn to you, and you're like an awesome dude and funny and fun to work with, and so we have known each other a long time now and been colleagues for a long time, and I'm really grateful for that.
And we're going to get into your MLB Network radio career, but you'd kind of made that jump up to show host on the late night show. And that's one thing I remember a lot when I was doing the updates and you were doing the show hosting, and kind of the fun vibe that show had with you there, obviously leading the ship, but Brady Gardner behind the scenes. Yeah. And then again, if you got to be at work until 2 or 3 in the morning, it's good to be around people you actually like.
That show came about kind of almost organically, right? So that I think allowed it to have part of that too. We originally, when there had been some turnover in the staff, that show was going to be just a highlight show, right? And that lasted about a week. And then all of a sudden it was like, we should do this as a real talk show. And Brady and I had worked together just kind of in passing, but like you and I mean, the three of us were friends together, right? And Brady is one of the most creative people I've ever worked with. And he has, similar sensibilities when it comes to popular culture and movies. And so we hit it off really well. And working with him was, I've had 2 different shows that I've worked with him on. He was one of the producers on the show that I've been on for the last 12 years, Power Alley, for about half the time that I've been on it. And he's just like, it's so much fun working with him. He's just a special guy. And I think he helped to create that vibe. And because it was late at night, we probably could get away with some things that you couldn't get away with at other times during the day. But it was a great place to cut our teeth.
Mike, we'll get back to that, but I want to kind of take you back. You're a guy who grew up in the second city. You're a Chicago guy, born and bred. And, I kind of think back, and I guess cities have eras. And I feel like when you were born and kind of coming up, maybe not your high school years, but Chicago was a really thriving town at that point. What was it like growing up in the Chicagoland area?
I mean, it's still like there are pangs in my heart at times for my hometown. I mean, I love Chicago. I loved being there. My dream was to work in Chicago, and I got to do that for 6 years at WGN Radio. And I grew up in the kind of mid to late '80s, and then into the I graduated high school in '94. And so, it was a fun time to be there. My mom was a musician, and so we spent a lot of time in the city. And I fell in love with downtown Chicago. Obviously grew up a huge sports fan. One of the interesting things about Chicago is that there's like really low cable permeation, or at least there was back in the day. And so you had to rely on the over-the-air channels. Unfortunately, WGN TV showed a lot of, games. I mean, mostly Cubs, but they also showed the Bulls, and they showed DePaul. And, then there was another lower power UHF station that showed the White White Sox. And so, getting to watch that, I grew up in a house that the street I grew up on dead ended into the old Bears practice field at Lake Forest College. So I get to go over and watch them practice right in the middle of like the Super Bowl, year. And when they were really the monsters of the Midway were really good. And so, it helped to shape my sports fandom. And, I think, 83 with the Sox, 84 with the Cubs, basically every year but 85 with the Bears. Those were things that like that's part of being a Chicago sports fan too, is that you're going to love the sports, but the sports aren't always going to love you back. And I think that was an important lesson to learn early on.
So here's an interesting question for you, Mike. I did the timeline. You're a couple years older than I am. And one of my first memories in football, which is a sport that I really love, is that Bears team. I mean, they were kind of everywhere at the time. I mean, all over. I remember I wore 72 because of Dexter Manley and William Refrigerator Perry when I was younger. And then, of course, in your high school and college years, the Bulls become like that.
Right.
How do you end up becoming this guy who just absolutely loves baseball when those two big forces are kind of pulling at you?
Yeah. So my mom is an enormous baseball fan. And she grew up as one of those rare people in Chicago that liked both teams. Like her two favorite players growing up were Billy Williams and Minnie Minoso. And so baseball was always part of it. My grandfather listened to Cubs games on the radio. My uncle was my hero when I was younger. He lived close to my parents and he played in softball leagues. And so baseball was just kind of ingrained, even though, and it helped that when, I was 7 years old, the White Sox won 99 games and made it to the postseason for the first time since 1959. And then next year, the Cubs won the Eastern Division, and we're in the postseason for the first time since 1945. So those were kind of seminal moments that helped, but it was because baseball was kind of in my family, and at least fandom was, and so that's why I fell in love with it. And so, like, I still have, like, I can tell you, in 1983, that was the year that I really remember baseball taking hold with me. Like, I pled to go to a doubleheader late in the year between the Cubs and the Phillies, and my then soon to be aunt took me to the games, and it was tankard mug day, and I'll show it to you. It's sitting here on my desk. This was the giveaway from 1983 with Ryan Sandberg, Lee Smith, Larry Boa, Ron Say, and Jody Davis on it, right? Like, this is still on my desk 40 years later. There's actually a maroon one from that same year that I never got, that I should probably look on eBay for it. I have a matching set, but like that's how, baseball got a hold of me, was just through my family, and because it was important to people that I was around, and that I fell in love with the game and have been obsessed with it ever since, even though I was a really lousy baseball player.
If I say Tito Landrum, does that give you chills?
Oh, God. Why was Brett Burns pitching the 10th anyway? So like as much as, like, we were north side, we grew up on the north side, and so Cubs were more prevalent with us. But the 83 team, like, I remember going to see them. I still think that they, because I love Jerry Dybzinski's name, that the Sox didn't play him enough. And like, I remember how dominant that team was. I mean, they won the West by like 20 games or close to it over Kansas City. And that was the Doug Rader was the manager of the Rangers that year, and he had a great line where he said the White Sox were winning ugly while the Rangers were losing pretty, and like that became the slogan for the team, right? Winning ugly. And so, this is Ron Kittle, who was a local kid. He's from Northwest Indiana, won the Rookie of the Year, and I think hit 35 home runs. And Greg Luzinski's hitting balls on the roof at Comiskey Park, and like, it was a really exciting time, and they had great pitching. Lamar Hoyt and Rich Dotson and Floyd Bannister, and I mentioned Britt Burns. Like, I still wish he had stayed healthy, man, because he was really good. So there was a lot of fun that was because that team was so good, and they hosted the All-Star game that year.
Yep.
That was the 50th anniversary of the All-Star game, and the first one had ever had been at Comiskey Park. It was the brainchild of Arch Ward, who was the sports editor at the Chicago Tribune, and And so, like, all of those things kind of conspired to get me into that team, and that was disappointing. But I think more than anything, like in my house, I think Steve Garvey is still a four-letter word from '84, from his 5-for-5 game in Game 4 of the NLCS. But yeah, we don't like to talk about Tito Landrum. We don't like to talk about Steve Garvey, or at least my family. So I'm fine with it. They those are names that are just like verboten.
Mike, you kind of mentioned growing up, you maybe had you didn't have the dream of, I'm going to be a pro baseball player. When did you decide that you wanted to be a guy who maybe could broadcast games?
Yeah, when I realized that I couldn't be a pro baseball player, I think that was probably it. So I was, I come from a performance-based family. I mentioned my mom is a musician. She sang with lyric opera choir in Chicago and with Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and her father was a pit musician in a lot of the Chicago theaters, like the Schubert, and ran a musical instrument distributor. So that part, that kind of performance, was in my blood. And I just loved baseball so much that, I wanted to be involved in it in any way that I could. And that's the best way I could do it in my mind, was to become a broadcaster. So, like, when I was a kid, we had a fenced in yard at our house, right? And we'd play tennis ball, baseball. I grew up in a neighborhood that we had just a ton of kids in, and everybody would come play baseball in our yard. And when nobody was there to play, I would just play by myself, right? Like, toss the ball up, hit it, right? I'd throw the ball against the garage door, fielding it, anything that I could. But I would give the play-by-play commentary while I was doing it. And our next door neighbor, who actually was, she ended up being very famous. She passed away a few years ago, but her name was Kathy Justin, who you may remember. She was on The West Wing. She was Mrs. Landingham on The West Wing. She also is Will Ferrell's mom in Wedding Crashers, the mom, Meatloaf, right? So she would get ticked at my parents when they'd call me in for dinner because she wanted to hear how the game went, the imaginary game that I was playing with Ed. So that's kind of how it started. I just started being this dorky little kid calling his own imaginary baseball games, and I just loved it so much. And it didn't take long, like, fat kid right first baseman aren't going to be in high demand as you get closer to your varsity years. So I had to find something to do it, and this was it.
Well, Mike, you matriculate through high school and you end up going to Loras College, which folks may know the alma mater of Greg Gumbel.
Yep.
But besides that, not much of a broadcasting pedigree. What sent you out there to Iowa?
Yeah. So the thing is that I had applied to a lot of bigger schools, right, with journalism programs, Mizzou and Arizona State. And I really thought I was going to go to ASU. I thought that was the place that I was going to go. Ohio University, which has a great reputation for sports journalism. And I fell in love with the Loras campus. So a really good friend of mine, actually two, they're brothers, their dad was a Loras alum. And so I kind of looked at it. And the other thing was that when I realized I wasn't a good enough athlete to really compete well at a high school level, I started competing in speech in high school because I loved the competition too, right? So you're doing performance and you're competing. And Loras had a long reputation of being a good program for competitive collegiate speech, but the program had been down for a number of years, and they were in the process of hiring a new coach. And I knew there was going to be an opportunity that there wouldn't be at some of the other schools to be able to compete right away. And so I did that, and that was a big part of it. I hate winter. Even growing up in the Midwest, like, I hate snow, I hate the cold. The day I visited the campus, and it's a beautiful campus. It's near the Mississippi River, so there's rolling hills in Dubuque, Iowa, and I fell in love with the campus right away. And then getting that opportunity and knowing that there was a background with that there were opportunities to do broadcasts on campus, and knowing that Craig Gumbel had gone there, and knowing that I had a friend that his dad raved about it. I said, okay, well, let's do this. It was the closest place to home. It was only a 3-hour drive. And so I ended up deciding to go there, and it was the best decision I ever made. I loved my Loras College experience. It was a liberal arts school, so I got a chance to have my finger in a bunch of different pots over the course of the years, with performance or competing, in a fraternity, lots of different classes. And then one of my buddies, whose dad had gone there, ended up, he was a year behind me. He ended up going there too. So I had good friends that were there as well, and it was a little unique unique in that regard. And, I got some experience there, but it also was Dubuque was the kind of market that you could try and break into when you were still in college. And I got my first job, in radio when I was a junior in college. And so, that really helped to fuel this as well. And that's almost 30 years ago now.
Before we get to that, I've got to ask you, when you were at Loris, you got big, I believe, into theater. And I think I've got a picture of you performing back in the day. I think that's you on the right there.
Oh God. Yeah. Thanks for
One,
pulling the one from Camelot.
what was the reason that you got into it? And two, how did that maybe help you along the way in your career?
So I had always been involved in theater. Again, I mentioned my mom being in performance, and so I was heavily involved in it in high school as well. And that picture's from my sophomore year as a freshman. There, I actually got the part of the Devil Applegate in Damn Yankees. So the first musical I did for them on stage was a baseball one, right? So yeah, I mean, I think performance was always part of the equation. It's funny. So like on the left across from me, the guy with the scowl is Dan Trop, who is actually my high school buddy, who's in that. Let's see, Mike Obermueller, who's in the back, ran for Congress in Wisconsin. The guy in the middle who was playing Arthur is Tom Kasobiak, who actually his best friend from law school lives up the street from me. So like a couple of there's, and I can't remember that. I wish I could think of the name of the guy who's standing behind me, but he's from Woodstock, Illinois. I remember that. But so, I think the performance aspect of it absolutely helped me as a broadcaster. And I think that competing in speech did as well. I think it gives you the opportunity to, to learn how to connect with an audience, which I think is super important. And so, it teaches you about things like the energy that you need to put on a good performance. It teaches you how to try and draw an audience in, how to get them to connect with your words. And I don't think that I could have followed a different path and gotten to where I am. I just don't see how I could have done it, because I think those performances, whether it be high school theater productions, college theater productions, speech competitions in high school and college, I think that they probably set me on the best baseline I could to be a broadcaster.
Mike, if I remember correctly, doing some research, I believe that your theater career may have directly led into radio. Did I have that right?
Yeah, that's right. So, you ever seen the movie Waiting for Guffman?
I've heard of it. I've never seen it.
Waiting for Guffman is one of those Christopher Guest movies, and it came out in like 1997, I want to say, and it was about a small town, a fictional town in Missouri called Blaine, that was doing a musical for its sesquicentennial, right? And this is just following the locals who were part of it. Well, when that movie came out, I was literally doing a musical about the Dubuque sesquicentennial, like that. Honest to God, it was called Sketches from a Drawing Room, and one of the authors of it was a guy named Paul Hemmer, and Paul had done mornings in Dubuque. He ended up doing mornings in Dubuque for 50 years.
Mm.
Paul had left the radio station that he had been at for 30 some odd. The FCC, right about this time, this is right about, Telcom 96, right? And there was all sorts of deregulation in the media industry. And the FCC was approving new transmitters. And Paul ended up winning the bid for one and started a classic rock station. And so I approached him while we were doing the show and said, would you ever need any help? Because I want to get into radio. And he said, sure. They came in, they quasi auditioned me, and they had me start voice tracking overnight. So that was my junior year in college. I started right around Thanksgiving of 1996. And it was a total mom and pop shop, right? So Paul was the general manager. He was the promotions director. He was the morning guy. He mowed the lawn at the transmitter site. His wife, Jan, did all the commercial traffic and billing. His son, Steve, was the program director and did afternoon drive. Steve had worked in radio since he was 14. And Steve's best friend, or one of his best friends, was the evening guy. And so I just kind of fit into that mix. And I can say this without any reservation that the single greatest influence on my professional career is Paul Hemmer. He did more for me to teach me how to be a broadcaster than anybody I've ever come across. He was a great broadcaster. He was a great teacher of broadcast, and the Hemmers are still really close. Steve and I text almost every day. He's still one of my best friends. He's like a brother to me. And that experience working in a small market radio station and getting to do all of these extra jobs, right? Where I did a
Yep.
lot of commercial production and I did, traffic scheduling and helped at times with the music direction and created programming was really fun and taught me a lot about the industry. And I loved every minute of it. It was, in a lot of respects, my favorite job that I've ever had because I got to do so much. But the Hemmers are super special to me and Paul in particular. Just like I would not have a career without the path that Paul Hemmer put me on.
Mike, you kind of answered my next question, so I'll go back a question. My experience, very similar to yours, got started at a local radio station that I believe the general manager was, I had been the mascot for her son's youth football team, so she knew me, so they gave me a job there. But do you think that's lost now that folks aren't coming up the way you and I did, where you had to do a little bit of everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely advantages to, getting a chance to go to a bigger market younger, right? Because you're probably in a better financial situation, and that certainly seems to be the case. A lot of it is driven by cost cutting, I think, in bigger markets, that you can get talented young people quicker. But I do think that, tell me if you agree with this. The biggest thing about being able to work from a small market to a large is that there is a lot more grace given when you make mistakes in a small market than when you make them, or at a small station, than when you make them in the big time. The big time, you get yelled at, and if it's a big enough mistake, you're out the door. In a small market or at a small station, you get the opportunity to learn from the mistake. And we don't learn nearly as much from our successes as we do from the things we screw up. And so I think that's the part that, it's going to be a custom, right, for younger broadcasters these days. If you're in a situation where you have a boss who is forgiving and knows that you're going to make mistakes and wants to help you teach, well, then you get the best of both worlds. But if you don't have that, there's a lot of pressure on you to succeed right away. And you may not have made the mistakes that allow you the opportunity to learn how to be better at the job. So, yeah, I do think that there are things that are lost. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily better or worse, but I appreciate those things because they made me better.
Mike, after, I believe, a stint at another station, you end up kind of, as you said, getting the dream job. You go work for WGN, kind of one of the star stations, if not the star station in Chicago. What was the break that got you to WGN?
I think blind luck as much as anything. So I had been at a radio station group or cluster in Northwest Indiana for about 7 months, and I just was not happy. And so I left that job and moved home. And the idea was, I had done some, baseball play-by-play there. I'd done basketball play-by-play. It was, okay, well, I'll find a job in another small market, or I'll try and get with a minor league team. But I would really love to end up being in my hometown. And WGN Radio was one of the rare places that offered what were essentially postgraduate internships, right? I had a degree at this point, and I was 24 years old. And it gave me an opportunity to, I applied for an internship in their sports department, and I would call and no answer and follow up. And finally, in an email that I sent to the sports producer, then Dan Filato, I made reference in it that I had initially sent my email to their sports director, who I didn't really know. Like, I knew who he was. Dave Ennett is his name. He's the voice of Northwestern. And I said, David suggested that I forward this on to you. And Dan called me back almost right away. So I don't know if Dan got duped by it because he was worried that his boss was going to get upset with him or not. Came in for an interview, did the interview, kept following up with him, and they decided that they wanted to bring me in to be an intern. And so it was a 13-week internship program. So this is 2000. Yeah, 2000. It paid $75 a week. And I essentially got there at 10 o'clock in the morning and stayed till 10 o'clock at night. And I did all the things you would expect an intern to do, from, running to get coffee, to picking up dry cleaning, to picking up dinner, but also got a chance to learn how to produce, right?
Mm-hmm.
So editing audio, producing a talk show, learning about the behind the scenes. And my 13-week internship turned into an 18-week internship, turned into a part-time producing role. And then when Dan left the next July, they elevated me to the sports producer job. And I didn't want to be a producer. I wanted to be on the air, but I was at home. I was I was at the radio station that I'd always wanted to work at. It was an amazing experience. And, gradually from there, I was able to work myself into some on-air roles there. But that was kind of how I ended up at WGN, and spent 6+ years there, just doing anchoring and reporting, and for the most part producing the sports department.
You kind of said before that was the dream, was to work in the home market, but then SiriusXM comes about. How did it come about for you?
So in January of 2007, Andy Mazer, who was our reporter, got the San Diego Padres play-by-play job. And Andy has done play-by-play for the Cubs and for the White Sox, and is a really good friend. And so his job was open. It's a pre and post game host. And there was an inning of play-by-play in every Cubs game. And I really wanted the job. And I think it was viewed as the internal candidate for it. And I was convinced that, this is going to be it. Everything's going to take off. And I got into the final group of interviewees. And when it came time to make a decision, they did not hire me as the internal candidate. Now, I would love to tell you that this is a decision that they regret and that they should feel bad for, but they hired Corey Provis, who's the voice of the Minnesota Twins. And so I think they probably made a pretty good call on that. And Corey, it's funny, Corey and I grew up a town apart from each other. Our birthdays are actually exactly 1 year apart. And I just saw Corey last weekend. He's a great dude and a terrific broadcaster. So they clearly made the right choice, but it became pretty clear to me that I didn't have, that was my chance at a promotion. And so I had to go someplace else. And it was a real struggle trying to find what was a good fit. And I would say it was late May or early June of 2007, probably late May. I found that there was an opening for a baseball anchor at SiriusXM. And I'm pretty sure that I'm the only person in radio history to apply for a job on the internet and actually get it. They had been struggling to fill this position, and they wanted to build out a pregame show on the play-by-play channels. I mean, this is still relatively early years of having the baseball contract, right? So XM then had it since 2005. And so I applied for it. Chuck Dickman was the program director at the time. He actually knew the executives at WGN because they had worked in the old CBS group together. He reached out to me. We did a quick interview. After this, that gone through HR screening, and then I can't remember the exact date. It was probably early June of that year. I can tell you it was the day that Carlos Zambrano got in a fight with Michael Barrett in the dugout for the Cubs, right? So I remember this happening.
Things you remember.
And the phone rang, and it was a number I didn't recognize, and it was Chris Eno, who was still an executive at SiriusXM. And Chris was calling to talk to me. He was the executive producer of the baseball channel at this point. And it became pretty clear in that conversation that they were going to offer me the job. And it was really hard because I was home. I had this incredible group of friends. One of my brothers, with all of his friends, lived 2 blocks from me in Chicago. We had this giant clubhouse. The groups of friends were so intertwined that my roommate ended up marrying one of my brother's roommates, right? This is how close this group was. And I was home, right? I was working at the place I always wanted to work. And it was very, very difficult to make a decision. And I remember I got the job offer. We had rented a house in Wisconsin, and there were about 15 of us that were up there staying together when I got the offer. And there was a lot of excitement, but a lot of tears too, because it was tough to leave. And that's how I ended up at XM. And I started, my 31st birthday, we had a big party. The day after it, I got on a plane. I moved to DC, and the next day I started at SiriusXM. That was July 9th of 2007, and I've been there ever since.
Mike, you mentioned you started doing updates. Eventually, you transition over to doing shows. And of course, I'll tell you this story. The reason I started as a producer at SiriusXM, I went over to doing baseball because I had done some updates back in my days at a local station, had done some for Dan Snyder's Redskins station, quote unquote, at the time. And I remember it was a day in December and everyone was on vacation. And Chris Eno walks up to me and goes, "You do updates, right?" "Yeah." "Okay, I need you to do some updates. You want to?" "Sure." Okay. So again, that's how I kind of made my transition. How did you make your transition from update anchor to show host?
So I think it was clear right away because, well, in addition to doing updates, I was doing a show every day.
Okay,
It was
that's
on the
right.
play-by-play channels. It was this recorded pregame show, and they gave me a lot of latitude to build it and to do interviews and how I wanted. And right at that time, so we had a very strange broadcast schedule, right? We had a morning show, but we didn't have a midday show or West Coast morning show that would replay it. There was a lot more emphasis on stuff at night.
Mm-hmm.
And so when news broke, occasionally they would need me for things. And that was what the big one I remember. I think I had done some fill in at night because they were short. I was on the air doing MLB Live late edition when Barry Bonds broke the home run record that year because Joe Castellano had been the host at the time, lived in the Bay Area, and was at the ballpark. So I remember doing that show, and I had done a couple of like that. And then when the Mitchell Report was released, I was the host that was closest to the studio, I think, because I lived like a mile and a half from there. And so I came in right away, and the great Chuck Wilson and I think, did most of the kind of analysis after that. And so that's kind of the first hosting I did. And it was not like, I liked being an update anchor. I'm kind of newsy. I wasn't sure I wanted to be a talk show host. And, my dream was still to be a play-by-play announcer, even though I hadn't had play-by-play experience in a long time at that point. And so it kind of created an opportunity for me. And the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it. And I'd fill in some during the postseason on the weekends and kind of kept pressing and saying, "Hey, I'd love to get a chance and get an opportunity." And then when they made some changes after Sirius and XM merged, that's when the evening show opened up. I was already there anyway, doing updates at night. And so they were like, "Well, why don't you host the show?" And that's, Chris Eno and Brent Gamble gave me that opportunity. And, I've been hosting since then. So that was 2009, maybe 2010. I can't even remember the year, but yeah, that's when we started doing MLB round trip.
Mike, eventually you do that for a while, then you kind of get your promotion up to the midday slot and Power Alley. And one thing I've always kind of struck me about you is the fact that, and I'm a big fan, I grew up on Tony Kornheiser, and obviously Le Batard took that spot. I always thought that you are maybe the perfect midday host because of the fact that you're not that hot take artist that's trying to get all the phone calls. You're a guy that is thoughtful, you're esoteric, you're funny. You're like that. Do you feel like that's a good slot for you because of the fact that maybe you can show your personality a little more and kind of go down some rabbit holes, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the way it's always been. I mean, I think, but I also think that works in other time slots. I think, one of the influences on me as a broadcaster, the people that I looked up to, was Spike O'Dell, who worked for years and years at WGN Radio and started in middays and then did afternoon drive and then morning drive there. And Spike was always upbeat, right? And he was fun and he was funny. And it was like you laughed along with him, right? And that's kind of the thing that I like. That's one of the things that drives me nuts about sports talk radio is that it's takes for the sake of being takes. And I think that's fine if you're really good at it. But I more than anything, as a listener, I want to be entertained. So like, I did not listen to a ton of sports talk radio growing up, but when Kornheiser went national, I did listen to him because I thought he was really smart and because he had fun. Like, what I will never forget, like, one of my favorite, I'm trying to think what the comparison was. It was, would you rather be Derek Jeter and be captain of the Yankees and be World Series champion and, on the back page or on page 6 all the time, right? And dating starlets on that? Or would you rather be Vince Gill, who had just shot a 62 on the golf course and was married to Amy Grant? I thought it was like one of the most bizarre, but it hit my sensibilities, right? Like I loved David Letterman's show. And so like that kind of stuff I really enjoyed. And that's why, that's what I wanted to be if I got that opportunity, because I can't fake it. Like I'll get heated about things, but it has to be genuine, because this is not theater. It's not acting, or it shouldn't be, because you're trying to connect your real life and the real life of other people. And you're trying to connect with them over something that we all enjoy. And personally, I don't like listening to people yell at me on the radio. I just don't enjoy that. I like people who get excited about things and like have passion about things. And so that's I think more than anything. I don't know that I ever put it together as to, maybe that's why it's the right time slot for me, but that's just who I wanted to be. I wanted to be more like Spike O'Dell than I wanted to be like somebody who was yelling and screaming and getting hot takes and just, saying something stupid to generate phone calls.
Mike, what your partner on the show, Jim Duquette, great guy to listen to, extremely knowledgeable as a former GM. Talk about working with Jim and why you think it's been a fit for you guys.
I told him the other day, I said, if you think about it, I really have 2 marriages. I have the marriage to my wife, which we've been married since 2010, and I've been married to Duke since 2012 on this radio show, right? So, why does it work? First of all, Jim's an unbelievable human being. I mean, he's just a great person. I mean, the guy gave an organ to his daughter. Like, that's what you need to know about him. Yep. He's a terrific dad, terrific person. He's really smart. And I think as he's gotten further and further away from the front office, I believe he would say this too, he's gotten a chance to have a little bit more fun, you know? So I think the reason why it works is that we respect the work that each of us put in, right? I never played. I was never an executive. I'm not a scout, but I've tried to learn as much as I can about what all of those people from the ground up in baseball do in an effort to try and give the listeners the best experience that I can. And you would have to ask Duke what he thinks of me really, but I think he has given me a lot of latitude to both learn on the job and to be able to express my opinions, and not treat me like I wouldn't have any idea because I didn't work in a front office. And I think it helped that he heard from people around the game that were like, some of his opinions are pretty good. So, which I'm grateful to them for thinking that. I think they're fools for believing that, but so I think that's probably why it works. I mean, it has been an unbelievably rewarding professional relationship. And I remember early on an executive telling me, he's like, you guys have great chemistry. And I was like, really? I didn't even pick up on that, but it's, we can fit. I noticed the difference, like when we work with other people, right? Like, we have a lot of coworkers that I love working with, but Jim and I can almost finish each other's sentences at this point. So there's just a comfort level with it. It's become really easy. And the more we work together, it seems like the more fun, the more we like to laugh, the more we like to be able to joke around. And that to me, again, that fits into, what I want a talk show to sound like.
Mike, you mentioned some of the executives in baseball saying that you had good opinions. One thing I wanted to ask you about is one of the things I thought that kind of...
I don't know that they're employed anymore, Jeremy. So that's...
One of the things that I think raised your profile from, hey, this is a guy in XM to this is a guy maybe we should listen to, was the special that you did on arm injuries, which I thought was a really good thing. And as a guy who's come from coaching youth sports and talking to I actually saw one of my old high school baseball coach at my high school last night. And he had told me before about how in his years of coaching, he went from seeing kids at 18 years old who could go through anything to having these weird fluky injuries because they were playing the same sport over and over again. So that really struck a chord with me. How proud of you are what you did there. I'm not going to call it a love letter, but maybe it's an intervention for the game that you love so much to try and maybe alert to some folks, hey, this is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that special, I mean, this is going back more than a decade now, which is crazy to think, right? With all the arm injuries that we still deal with. Um, I think more than anything, it appealed to my news sensibilities,
Mhm.
right? Like that I wanted to be able to, I knew we weren't going to solve the problem, right? But I wanted to be able to present as many facts on what the problem actually is, what are potential solutions for it. And I think that also, like drawing it back to college, like that goes back to competing in speech, right? I've competed in persuasive speaking, right? Where you're building out these ideas and you're trying to outline it in like, here's the issue, here's what's being done, here's how we can fix it going forward. And so that to me was really important in trying to create something that was newsy. And I didn't, I think you end up doing a lot of research, or at least this is my take is
Mhm.
I spent a lot of time doing research because this is again not something that I have ever done professionally. I've never been a professional baseball player, never been a professional coach, I've never been a manager, I've never been an executive, I've never been a scout, but I need to learn how everybody coexists in order to have a good idea of how baseball works, because I owe it to the audience to try and have that, because in the end they're the ones that are going to determine whether or not you should be employed, because either they're listening or they're not. And so I wanted to make sure that I had a clear understanding of how everything worked. And that special was, I mean, very time consuming, but worth it. And I've loved doing projects like that. Subsequently, none have really had the same impact
Mhm.
as the arm special did, at least in terms of, I think, memories. Like there were some, like the Vin Scully special that we did, as a broadcasting nerd, I really appreciated that, right? Learning about Vin's career and talking to people that he worked with, and getting to speak to Vin about his career. Those were things that were really, that I think were important to me to learn about, and then to be able to share the love of it with other people. The one about Mike Martin that we did for the college channel, when 11 was retiring, the late great coach at Florida State. College baseball has become a passion of mine over the last 15 years. And so being able to do that. So anytime, whether it's the arm or other ones, it's the amount of time and research and care that you take in preparing to do it well, I think that helps to drive those.
Mike, one of the other things you got to do at SiriusXM was you got to scratch that play-by-play itch again. You went down to the desert and did Arizona Fall League games. How did that opportunity come about, and why was it important for you to get down there and do it?
So it came about because Steve Cobb, who was the director of the Arizona Fall League, was a big listener to our channel and wanted to do games on it. And the first game we did here was actually the All-Star game. With it was, I can't remember what the name of it was now. They call it the Fall Stars game now. Um, and it was a simulcast on MLB Network Radio and the Fantasy Channel. The Fantasy Channel was very early on, and there was a big fantasy conference that was there. So Cliff Floyd and I did that. And then the more we talked, the more we thought, hey, this is a great opportunity to be able to introduce people to prospects after the World Series is over. And so we started by doing a week of games, and then it gradually grew to 2. And it's all because Steve wanted us to be involved, and specifically he wanted me to be involved. And I'm grateful to, Chris Eno and Jordan Greenberg, who were the ones who really spearheaded that over the years, to be able to keep getting that opportunity to do it. And, you're right, it scratched the itch between that and the Futures game every year, Perfect Game, All-American Classic. I got opportunities to do play-by-play. I got an opportunity to learn about these players. And I took the same kind of mindset to learning about those players that I did, say, to the special we were just talking about on arm injuries, because I feel like you're trying to introduce your listener to who these players are and why they're important, right? So you have to spend time preparing and not just looking at their statistics, but learning about who they are. And I think that helped to drive my style as a play-by-play announcer as well. And it gave me an opportunity to do it, and to know that I was going to have games that I could call over the course of the year, even if they weren't very many, to try and get better at it so that I might get a chance to be a major league announcer at some point.
Before we get to that, obviously, a huge part of your career, your work with the Diamondbacks. When you're down there, obviously, you're focusing on the young players and the prospects, but is it giving you a chance to go around to coaches and managers and executives shaking hands and just saying, "Hey, I'm Mike Ferrin. Nice to meet you."
Yeah, there's definitely some of that, and starting to build connections. But I think that was kind of the nice thing about being a talk show host and living in the DC and Baltimore area, was that I had access to the minor leagues a lot. And so I could do that to try and learn and sit with scouts. And I think that's helped to foster a lot of, the way I try to go about presenting information, because I wanted to learn that. And I actually think it's a great tool for any broadcaster, is to go and sit on a series with a scout and do it at low levels, do it at high levels, do it at college, because there's a difference between what amateur scouts are looking for and what pro scouts are looking for. So it helped to do that, and it helped to keep me connected, and help me build some sources that I have as well. So all of those things I think were important too, in trying to build a Rolodex of not just information, but of a literal Rolodex of people you could count on, to be able to help you understand the game better, so you can help listeners understand the game better.
Mike, you mentioned eventually you get the job with the Diamondbacks. I believe you were doing it concurrently, obviously, with your work at SiriusXM. What led to that chance to get in at first as a host, but eventually doing games at the major league level?
So I want to say it's probably about 2014. Derek Hall, who was the president and CEO of the Diamondbacks, came in studio with us in DC, and we were doing Power Alley. He was in with us for an hour, and at one of the breaks, I had made no secret of the fact that I wanted to live in Phoenix on the radio, because I love Phoenix. Again, hate the cold, so I sit to here on a day where it's gonna be 111. So he said to me at one of the breaks, he said, "Hey, when are you going to come work for us?" And I was like, "When do you have a job open?" Right. So a couple years later, it was 2016. It was right at the end of the National League Championship Series. The Diamondbacks and Jeff Munn announced that he would not be returning, who had been in the role that I ended up inheriting. And so I immediately reached out. Steve Berthume, who's the television announcer, he and I had become really good friends over the years. Back when Steve was doing Baseball Tonight, he would listen to MLB Round Trip on his way home, and that's how Steve and I got to be friends. And so I reached out and was like, "Listen, I'm super interested in this," because I knew that it was a backup play-by-play job too. And I just so happened to, at the end of that World Series, be heading out to Arizona to be able to, I guess it was 2015. It was the end of 2015 in LCS. So I was going out to do Fall League, and there I met Scott Geyer, who was the director of broadcasting. We had about an hour-long conversation after a Fall League game. We didn't know each other, but we really hit it off. And by the end of that trip, I was meeting with the other broadcasters, having dinner with them. And my wife had come out for a weekend, and her parents had come down. And I was like, I'm feeling pretty good about this. I think it might actually happen. And on the flight home, I sent Scott a note, and I'd said, "Hey, just thanks for everything. It was really great meeting you. I look forward to hearing from you." And I might get emotional about talking about this, but I got an email back from him on the flight that said, "I hope you have a safe trip home, because tomorrow I'm going to offer you a job as a major league broadcaster." Wow. And it was, you work so hard to try and get that. And my path is not the same as I'm grateful for my path. I know so many and have so many friends that have toiled in the minor leagues for 20 plus years who've never gotten this opportunity. And so I'm grateful for it every day. And that's how I ended up with Arizona. That's how I ended up out here. And I spent 6 years with that organization, and I still do some fill in for them. But that was a really special day.
So, Mike, I'm going to take you from that great emotional moment to the first time you do a game. Is there an "oh crap" moment, or had you done so much that you were, "Okay, look, I know what I'm doing. Just stay calm and I can do this job"?
Total "oh crap" moment, because I had started the job, and part of it was, most of the job was doing pre and post. Yep. And the pre and post game host doesn't generally travel. But Scott had said, "Hey, I want to get you on a couple trips so you can see what big league travel is like." And the Diamondbacks opened that season with a 7-game homestand and then a 10-game road trip to LA, San Diego, and San Francisco. So I go to Los Angeles, there for Dodgers opening day, which was cool, and like going the whole thing. And Steve Berthume starts not feeling well. And all of a sudden he's losing his voice. And I get a call, like as we get to San Diego, it was like, I don't think Bert can go tomorrow. We're going to need to slide Greg Schulte over to TV and you're going to have to make your debut. Okay, great. So I didn't have any time to like, I mean, I was prepared for it, right? But like, I didn't have any time to prepare emotionally. All of a sudden it's like, oh crap, you're doing a major league game for the first time tomorrow. And I had done some spring training once at that point, but it's not the same. So It was, I actually have the lineup card for it. April 15th, 2016, Diamondbacks beat the Padres 3-2. Zach Greinke started that game. Brad Ziegler got out of a bases loaded, nobody out jam in the ninth inning with a double play to get the win. And I ended up doing all 3 games that weekend, and that was my first chance. So yeah, there was like definitely a whole goodness. And I bet you if you listen to that broadcast, I am talking 1,000 miles an hour for all 3 hours of it.
Do you feel like baseball slows you down a little bit?
Me, no.
Okay.
I think baseball, like, this is where like the theater and speech background comes in, right? Baseball gives you the opportunity to build excitement in a way that other sports don't because there is so much downtime. I'll paraphrase it, but Bill King, who, Bill King might be the greatest football announcer of all time. He might be the greatest basketball announcer of all time. And I think he was a great baseball announcer, like one of the best. He did the A's for years and years. And in an interview in the 70s, King said something that was basically like, if you're listening, every inning, I want to get you to feel a little twist in your stomach. And if I do that, then I've really got you. And that's always stuck with me because that's what I grew up listening to, was like, how do you get them hooked? And baseball gives you that opportunity. It's basically the regular game is 17 or 18 one-act plays, right? So you're building the emotion and the level over the course of each half inning, and yet it's all part of a greater work that's the game. And so there are peaks and valleys, and there are ebbs and flows in every inning, even in a routine inning, in every plate appearance, there's those things. That's what I really love about broadcasting baseball, is that every bit of it lets you build those emotions, and then you either get an exciting or a disappointing payoff, but either way it elicits an emotion out of you. I don't know, I'm sure you probably saw, there was a TikToker earlier this year who did the difference between NFL and baseball, right? Where like NFL, it's 17 games and it's like you lose and it's like, boys played great this week. Oh shucks, we'll get them next week. And baseball, you lose 1 of 162 and you're cursing like a son of a gun and like, can they not catch the stinking, right? Like, and so how do you ride that? How do you use that while trying to stay professional? Like that's part of the joy, I think, of calling baseball for me.
Mike, you talk about crest of emotion. I can't imagine there's been anything bigger in your life than when you called the World Baseball Classic games. I remember actually sending you a note afterwards. I had heard your work early on at the Diamondbacks, and I said, Ferrin, that was amazing. Like, again, you've advanced so much, but you had risen to the moment there. What was it like to get out there and call that type of game, which some argue is almost as big as calling a World Series game because of the national pride involved?
Man, it was cool. I mean, like, and I think most of the attention probably gets paid to, like the Trey Turner Grand Slam game, right? Like where the U.S. won in the quarters of the semis. They had the big comeback, and Turner had the Grand Slam, and that like brought him back against Venezuela. To me, I kind of got prepped for that because we had a sellout in Phoenix for Mexico and the U.S., and Joey Meneses had a pair of home runs, and I would say that it was a pro-Mexico crowd, and I mean, Phoenix is only, 2 hours from the border, and there's a lot of Mexican Americans that are in the area, and a lot of Mexican emigres. And so like, that was really cool to help prep for that. But being a part of those games, first of all, the games were great, and that makes it really easy, right? If the games are good, your job as a broadcaster is super easy because then all you're doing is riding the crest of emotions. And fortunately, every single one of those was like that, especially when we got to Miami for the knockout stages. It was incredible atmospheres, great crowds, great opportunity to see some of the best baseball players in the world, and then playing in these games that were incredibly intense. So, I mean, I don't know that I did anything there so much as just showed up and enjoyed the game like a fan would, right? Like in terms of just being excited about the prospects of what was to come on a given night.
Mike, I think one thing I admire about you is I feel like you got a good idea of the right time to kind of pull the right lever. And I feel like you pulled the right lever when you decided to bore a little bit into college baseball, a sport that has really kind of taken off in the last few years. What was the decision making part of your mind to go, you know what, this might be something I want to learn a little bit more about, maybe try to get in on broadcasting?
Well, I'll take you back to the beginning of it. Was probably 2012 when I was looking for more opportunities to host. And I went to Matt Fishman, who was then running the college channel at SiriusXM, and I was like, "What do you think about starting a baseball show on Sunday nights?" And he was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so that was the first foray into it. And I fell in love with college baseball. I guess it was probably 2010 or 2011, maybe. And I fell in love with it. I had not been a big college baseball. There's my guy, Mike Rudy, one of my best friends and my co-host on This Week in College Baseball. But I got into it. And then when I left to go to the Diamondbacks, I had to give it up because I had to give some things up, and I missed it terribly. So when I left the Diamondbacks at the end of 2021, one of the first things I did was reach out to some people that I knew at ESPN about potentially doing college baseball. And it took a little bit more than a year to get in the door there. But it was something that I really wanted to do because I'm passionate about it. And I'm grateful for the opportunities that Phil Orleans and Scott Gustafson had given me there. I got to do my first year there. I got to do a lot of SEC games in one of the most loaded drafts in SEC history. And that was really cool. So I get to see a ton of talent. And this is from this year's regional in Tucson with my buddy Jensen Lewis, who's one of our colleagues on MLB Network Radio. And then this year, I got a chance to do their Thursday night ACC package with Gabby Sanchez, who is my other partner now in professional life. Gabby and I do a lot of games together. Terrific guy, super well prepared, so much fun to be around, really smart. And we just got these opportunities to be able to do it. It gave me a chance to do television for the first time, which has been really fun because it's completely different than radio. Radio, you're on your own. Television's a collaboration. And when you work with pros, and ESPN is loaded with pros on the production side, man, is it fun because you get to work with people who you really trust and really can learn from and find ways to really try to build something special for your audience. So it's been great, and I love college baseball. College baseball is in a great spot right now. There's more talent pouring into it. The pitch timer and pitch communication devices have saved the pace of college baseball. They're now like 3-hour games, and you're still going to end up with clunkers because it's not there's still a lot of people that are going to end up selling insurance and not play professional baseball. But the talent level is so good. The intensity of it is great because it's a third as long as a major league season. And so every game counts 3 times as much. And that makes it exciting too.
Yeah, I've had a blast doing Georgetown games over the last few years, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful sport. And
well, you picked a good time to do Georgetown games too, man. That is an ascendant program.
Yeah, Edwin Thompson does some good stuff. Loves me, so it's been a blast being part of that. Mike, one last one before we wrap it up. What's your advice for young broadcasters?
I would see the thing is that I could go 40 different directions.
Oh, we know.
Right? So, I think I would say my biggest advice for young broadcasters is try and sample everything. So I think performance is really important, right? So I think if you get a chance to do theater or be a singer, which is going to teach you breath control, I think those are things you can do. Learning to do improv performances, right? That helps you think on your feet. Learning to perform in front of people will help to take some of the nerve and the edge off it. Learning those things about performance and becoming a good writer, because I think if you can write, then you can speak. And those are probably not the skills that everybody talks about when they're talking about young broadcasters, take every opportunity and, dance like nobody's watching or whatever crap that is. But I think those are really important skills to have and to learn from. And it's like practice, right? It's things that you can practice that are going to make you a better broadcaster. Those are cross-disciplinary things. And maybe it's because I went to a liberal arts college, so I got exposed to a lot of different things. But I think those are really important aspects. And then I think it's study so that you're an expert on the subject. Don't just there's a young broadcaster who, I'm not going to mention a name, but they have a lot of opinions right now, and their opinions are based on what they think they know in their mid-20s as
Mhm.
opposed to the information that they've gotten. And it's okay to not have a strong opinion, but I think that there is an importance to learning about how the game that you're covering is played, how it's evaluated, how the statistics work that make you better, because then it makes you understand. And I think you need to go into it thinking you don't know anything. And I think you should do that on a daily basis, right? Like you're never going to know everything about whatever sport you're covering. So it's a chance for you to learn. And if you learn something cool and you share it with your audience, there's a good chance that your audience is going to think it's cool as well.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. This has been extremely cool getting a chance to talk to you, get into your exciting life as a broadcaster, your background and everything. Mike, thank you so much. Good catching up, and thanks for joining us here on Huber and Friends.
My pleasure, Jeremy. You know how much I love you. You're one of my favorite broadcasters, and you're one of the best dudes that I've ever worked with. So this was a lot of fun for me to be able to hang out with you for an hour. We don't get to do that anymore. So
Not like the old days, Mike.
nope.